Okay, so just a reminder, kind of what we went over last time. We talked about solving by completing the square. This is section 8.1 or part of 8.1. We've already gone over part of it. So remember, this is information for solving quadratics. And we talked about how when you have a quadratic, there are multiple ways to solve it. First of all, a quadratic is an equation that has degree 2, which means the highest exponent is x squared. And then the different ways to solve a quadratic. The most common way that we usually use is by factoring. If that doesn't work, we usually go to quadratic formula, which is not the most fun thing, but it works and gets us the answer every time. A third way we solve is by using square roots. Okay, that is the easiest way to solve, but the problem's not always set up for that. And the fourth way we are learning is completing the square. Essentially, completing the square is taking a regular problem and turning it into a square root problem. The way that we turn it into a square root problem is by adding a special number to each problem. And that's what we went over this past Friday. So for example, if I had x squared plus 12x plus blank, I want to add a special number here that's going to make it factor perfectly into a perfect square. You could sit here and guess and check until you get the correct number, or a quicker way to do it is using the formula b divided by 2 squared. That's the formula to find the number that goes in the blank. Okay, so my b value in this case is 12. So 12 divided by 2 squared, 12 divided by 2 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. So 36 is the perfect number that fits in that blank to make it factor perfectly. Because you could factor using the AC method, which things multiply to get 36, add to get 12. Excuse me, and that would be 6 and 6. Or the quicker way to do it, or the shortcut way to do it, is it always factors into a parenthesis with x and a squared on the outside. And the number that goes on the inside is the number before you squared it, just the b divided by 2. So the number is 6, and it's a positive 6, so it's x plus 6 squared. So if you wanted to memorize a formula for this, the formula is you're given a problem x squared plus bx plus blank, and this blank is b divided by 2 squared. And then it always factors into x plus, what would this number right here be? The b divided by 2 before you squared it, right? So this is just b divided by 2. And if that's a negative number, it's a minus, right? Or you do plus negative, the same thing. Okay, let's do another one, or a couple more like that, and then we'll get into actually solving the equations. What about if I had x squared minus 8x plus blank? To fill in the blank, we're going to do b divided by 2 squared. In this case, b is negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 squared would be negative 4. And negative 4 squared is 16. So 16 is the number that goes in the blank. And then to write it in factored form, it is in parentheses x with a squared on the outside. What's the number that's going to go in the parentheses? Negative 4. So you could put plus negative 4, or you could put minus 4. Up to you, same difference. Questions about that? Okay. One more. This time let's do an odd number so that it's a fraction when we work it out. If we had x squared minus 11x plus blank. Same thing, we're going to do b, which is negative 11 divided by 2 squared. That doesn't divide evenly, so you want to leave it as negative 11 divided by 2, or negative 11 over 2, because it's easier to square that way. To square a fraction, you just square the top, square the bottom. What's negative 11 squared? 121. And then 2 squared is 4. So that's the number that goes in the blank, 121 over 4. And then you wouldn't want to try to factor this because it's not fun to figure out what two things multiply to get 121 fourths and add to get negative 11. So it's a good thing we have the formula for it. The formula says x on the inside squared on the outside. What's the number that goes on the inside with x? The negative 11 over 2. Negative 11 over 2. And that's your answer. That's supposed to say minus. Sorry, it kind of squished together. X minus 11 over 2 squared. Will number 3 be on the homework? Yes, probably it will be. Questions about that? Okay, so that's the first half of the lesson, is just practicing finding that number to make it factor perfectly. The second part of the lesson is figuring out, how to solve using that. So let's do a few problems. We're going to start off doing the ones with the whole numbers, and by the end, we're going to get into the ones with the fractions. Okay, so start off with number 4. If we have the problem x squared plus 6x plus 2 equals 0. The first thing you have to do is, notice there's not a blank here. We need to make a place for our blank. Our blank usually goes after the x squared and the x. So x squared plus 6x, this plus 2, I need to move to the other side. How am I going to move to the other side to get it out of the way? Subtract 2 from both sides. And so I can write it as x squared plus 6x. And now I don't have anything there, so I can put in my plus blank equals, on the other side, 0 minus 2 is negative 2. And negative 2, if I put a plus blank on the left-hand side, I have to also put a plus blank on the right-hand side. Okay, so now we're going to fill in the blank the same way as we did before. B divided by 2 squared. My B value in this case is what number? 6. Okay, so that's my B is 6. So I'm going to do 6 divided by 2 squared. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And 3 squared is 9. So 9 is going to go in each blank. From here on the left-hand side, we write it in factored form, just like we did before. So this is parentheses with x on the inside, squared on the outside. What's the number that's going to go in the parentheses? Yeah, positive 3. So x plus 3 squared equals negative 2 plus 9 is 7. And now notice this is a solving by square roots problem. We just take the square root to get rid of the squared. So take the square root of both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. So over here on the left-hand side, the square root of x plus 3 squared would just be x plus 3. On the right-hand side, it is plus or minus the square root of 7. I can't take the square root of 7. I can't break it down. Can't simplify it. And then to solve for x, we're going to move the plus 3. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And that's going to go up in front of the plus or minus. And so my answer is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 7. Questions about that? Okay, let's do another one. That's essentially it for completing the square. All the problems are just like that, except for the ones that have a fraction in them. But we're just going to keep on practicing this for today, and then we'll move on to the next lesson on Wednesday. Okay, so look at number 5. If I have x squared plus 4x equals negative 6. Okay, for this one, do I need to move the thing out of the way so I can put my blank in? No, it's already moved out of the way. I have x squared plus 4x equals. Okay, so just make a space for your blank. X squared plus 4x plus blank equals -6 plus blank. Take a second and fill in the blank on your own. Okay, so when you fill in the blank, you do b divided by 2 squared. Your b value is the 4. So 4 divided by 2 squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So the number that's going to go into blank is 4. On the left-hand side, we need to factor this. So in factored form, it's parentheses x on the inside, squared on the outside. The number inside with x is +2. So x plus 2 squared equals -6 plus 4. It's -2, right? And then now you solve this using square roots. So take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. On the left-hand side, the square root of x plus 2 squared is just x plus 2. On the right-hand side, it's plus or minus the square root of -2. Can I break it down or take anything out? You can take out an I, right? Because it's a negative on the inside, so you can take the negative out as an I. So I square root of 2. You got to leave the 2 on the inside because there's not like 2 2's to pull out. And then how do I solve for x now? Subtract 2 and put it up in front of the plus or minus. So it's -2 plus or minus I times the square root of 2. And that's your answer. Okay, let's do this one. What if I have x squared plus 8x equals -15? Go ahead and put your blank in. So x squared plus 8x plus blank equals -15 plus blank. We're going to do b divided by 2 squared. In this case, that'd be 8 divided by 2 squared. Which would be 4 squared, and 4 squared is 16. So that's the number that goes in the blank on both sides. On the left-hand side, x squared plus 8x plus 16. Write that in factored form. So it's going to be x on the inside, squared on the outside. Inside with the x is going to be +4. So x plus 4 squared equals -15 plus 16 is 1. How do you solve for x now? Square root both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. On the left-hand side, you get just x plus 4. On the right-hand side, this one's a little bit different because what is the square root of 1? So it's plus or minus 1. So when I go to solve for x, I'm going to subtract 4 here. So this is like two problems. This is like +1 minus 4 and -1 minus 4, right? Because plus or minus 1 means +1, -1. +1 minus 4 is -3. -1 minus 4 is -5. And those are your answers. Okay, the fact that these two answers came out to be like pretty numbers, 3 and 5, tells me that this actually could have factored at the beginning. Anytime you get these nice looking numbers, even if they're fractions, it could factor at the beginning. You could solve by factoring. All the rest of the problems we've done so far, you couldn't solve by factoring though. You'd have to do quadratic formula or completing the square. Okay, let's do some that are the fraction ones now. Okay, so if I had a problem like this, x squared minus 7x minus 1 equals 0. First thing you have to do is move the 1 over to make room for your blank. So I get x squared minus 7x plus blank equals 1 plus blank. Now we're going to do b divided by 2 squared. B in this case is negative 7 divided by 2 squared. That doesn't divide evenly, so I'm going to leave it as a fraction, and then I'm just going to square the top, square the bottom. Negative 7 squared is positive 49. 2 squared is 4. So that's the number that goes in the blank on both sides, 49 over 4. Okay, so on the left-hand side, write it in factored form. So parentheses, x on the inside with a squared on the outside. What's the number that's going to go in the parentheses? Minus 7 over 2. On the right-hand side, the number we put over here are these two numbers added together. So 2 ways you can do it. You can do it on your calculator. You want to keep it as fractions though, and I'll show you why in just a second. 1 plus 49 divided by 4. Nope. 1 plus 49 divided by 4. If you hit math, enter, enter, it'll put it back into a fraction, and it's 53 over 4. Or you could always get a common denominator here, right? This is like 1 over 1 plus 49 over 4. What would the common denominator here be with 4 and 1? 4. I need to turn this one into a 4, right? So multiply by 4 on top, multiply by 4 on bottom, and that becomes 4 fourths plus 49 fourths. And then how do you add fractions now that they have a common denominator? Add across the top, keep the bottom. What's 4 plus 49? 53 over 4. Do it by hand or do it on the calculator. It doesn't matter. Just keep it as a fraction, and you're about to see why. From here, I need to get rid of the squared. How do I get rid of the squared? Take the square root of both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. Okay, so on the left-hand side, the squared and square root undo each other. I just get x minus 7/2. On the right-hand side, it's plus or minus. I'm taking the square root of the whole thing. So look at the top. Can you take the square root of 53? No, so it's still just the square root of 53 on top. Look at the bottom. Can I take the square root of 4 on bottom? Yes. What is the square root of 4? 2. And that's good because if we couldn't take the square root, you'd have to rationalize at that point, which would be awful, right? So just a heads up, this number on bottom, you always divide by 2. And when you square it, it's always going to be 4. And so you're always going to be able to take the square root of it to get 2 on bottom. Okay. At this point, how do I solve for x? Add the 7 over 2 up in front. And so I get x equals 7 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 53 over 2. And that is totally the right answer. If you wanted to, though, don't those have a common denominator? You could technically write it as 7 plus or minus the square root of 53 over 2. And what does that look like? Quadratic formula. Okay, so if you solve this using the quadratic formula, this is the answer you would have got. It's the exact same thing. Okay, whatever you prefer to do. Questions about that? Okay, let's do another one like that. Again, it's the exact same process. You're doing the exact same thing. It's just a little bit more difficult because it has fractions instead of whole numbers in it. If we had the problem x squared plus x equals 7. Okay, so I need to put in a blank. X squared plus x plus blank equals 7 plus blank. Okay, the number going in the blank, b divided by 2 squared. What's your b value here? 1. So 1 divided by 2 squared. Square the top, square the bottom. 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. So 1/4 is the number that goes in each of the blanks. On the left-hand side, it factors into x on the inside squared on the outside. What number is also on the inside with the x? Before you squared it, 1/2. On the right-hand side, I'm doing 7 plus 1/4. You could do this 2 ways. 3 ways, actually. You do it on your calculator, right? 7 plus 1/4, math, enter to get a fraction. You could also just think about it. What is 7 plus 1/4? 7 1/4, right? And then you'd write that as a mixed, as an improper fraction. 7 1/4. Do you remember how to write it as an improper fraction? You do 7 times 4 and then add 1 to it. You remember that? 7 times 4 is 28, and 28 plus 1 is 29/4. Or the other way to do it is get a common denominator. 7/1 plus 1/4. What's my common denominator here? 4. So I have to multiply the first one by 4. So I get 28/4 plus 1/4 to get 29/4. I don't care how you do it. Just get that number one way or the other. So that number is 29/4. From there, how do you solve for x? Square root both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus. So I'm left with x plus 1/2 equals, take the square root of the top, take the square root of the bottom. Can you take the square root of 29? No, so it's just plus or minus the square root of 29 over, what's the square root of 4? 2. And then how do you solve for x now? Subtract 1/2. And that goes up in front. So I get x equals negative 1/2 plus or minus the square root of 29/2. Or if you want to write it all together, it's negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 29 all divided by 2. Either one of those is a correct answer. Questions about that? Okay, so we have one lesson left, and then we're finished learning things for the semester. That's the end of this one. Make sure you can do your homework. Make sure you're working on your Math Excel homework to get your grade up, and I will see y'all in class on Wednesday.